The hits kept coming this week with Chris Jericho making the podcast rounds. This time he was talking with Dave LaGreca and Bully Ray on Busted Open. The first thing they did was address the Broken Skull Sessions, the groundbreaking podcast interview between Chris Jericho and Stone Cold Steve Austin WrestleMania weekend. Here's a clip of Chris Jericho addressing his appearance.
What about the feedback from Broken Skull Sessions did you enjoy this week?
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, I think the whole concept of it was so unbelievable in a lot of ways. And I really enjoyed kind of hearing everybody's thoughts and opinions, including you guys, because nobody really knew what to expect. It did come just completely out of left field. And the opening line of the show, if you've seen it, as I said, I can't believe that there's not snipers on the roofs here to take me out. I can't believe I'm actually on the show. But yeah, what a kind of monumental, groundbreaking moment that was, for sure.
Were you concerned about a final edit? Were you concerned that if you and Steve maybe spoke too much about AEW or spoke about things that the WWE would not have approved of, that they would have edited it? Did you guys have any guarantees going into the chat?
Well, I mean, I think the answer to that. I mean, we both kind of were very adamant about how we wanted the show to be done. But if a certain, 73-year-old wakes up one day and goes, "What? I never said that," the whole thing could be changed, wiped off the face of the earth or whatever. But I also think there was a lot of trust both from Vince and from Tony Khan towards both Steve and myself, knowing that we wouldn't go that way. There was no reason to kind of talk about things that are going to bury either side. It was a very positive interview, as you guys saw. So there was a lot of trust, I think, afforded to us. And I think the moment that Vince said, "Do it," he knew what we'd be talking about. And Tony even said it too. He trusted Steve and I to kind of take care of both parties, and we did that. So if it was anybody else, I don't know if we'd be afforded the same trust, and there might have been a little bit more snaky, but I had Steve's word and Steve had my word that we were going to do our best to have a great show. And there was no reason to kind of tear anybody down or talk any bad things. And I think that's one of the reasons why it pretty much aired exactly as we spoke. I mean, the thing was over 2 hours long.
I just think that's so cool that he said that just about nothing was cut. He said the only thing he noticed they cut was a line here or there, basically to save time. Nothing cut of substance, nothing cut related to AEW, nothing was off limits. Jericho said as far as he was aware, Vince was completely hands off with this, and as it should be. And he addressed, him and Steve kind of talked about it. How do we want to approach this? There was a way to benefit both promotions by doing it the way that they did. He basically had nothing bad to say about anything. So, he took a few shots at Vince, I suppose, but it wasn't like AEW is such a better company, or this is why WWE sucks, or nothing like that. And nobody expected it to be, but it's interesting to hear it from Chris himself and hear that it basically went off exactly as happened. But during this podcast with Dave LaGreca and Bully Ray, that wasn't the only thing that was newsworthy. That's just to put a little bow on the whole Broken Skull Sessions thing, because now we're going to get into some other stuff that they talked about on this podcast. Bully Ray flat out asked Chris Jericho what he thought about the Wednesday night wars, quote unquote, between NXT and AEW Dynamite. And here's what Jericho had.
Hey, Chris, the Wednesday night wars are over. Obviously,
Yes.
Bully and I talked a lot about it here on the show. Fans made a big deal about it. Like, what's the feel about it in the locker room? Is there that feel of victory? Hey, you took a WWE product and made them switch nights? Is there a feel of that within AEW?
I don't think that there's, like, we didn't, pop a little bit of the bubbly and have a celebration backstage and have cake and whatever. But I mean, this war was decided months ago. And once again, this is not a war that we asked for or a war that we created. It's just WWE doing what they do. And they lost, handily. They got beaten bad. And yes, it's good that they have, they had to move because of the NHL and all these other ideas, but it's just good for them to move anyways. They'll do better not worrying about what our ratings are. And we'll probably do better not having them, but it's not like we ever really worried about it. We never had NXT on during the show. We never knew what segments were going up against next, what segments are going up against which, or what was going on. We just did our show.
It's not entirely true that WWE picked that fight with AEW. They did by choosing to put NXT on the USA Network, but Wednesday night was already NXT's night. I think a lot of people forget that. Wednesday night, NXT was already on the WWE Network. It was on the WWE Network every single Wednesday. So Wednesday night was already NXT's night. When AEW went on Wednesday night, they were going head-to-head with the WWE Network. So all the WWE did was put it on TV. They evened the playing field, so to speak. They made it available to just as many people people who don't have the network, all that shit, as to who have it with AEW to watch AEW. So all they were doing was evening the playing field there. And then it was a fair ball game, and at that point, AEW did beat NXT in the ratings, but barely. And I know there's people that are going to say, well, they did beat AEW legitimately a couple times. And this last rating is what I'm going to talk about here. Obviously, that is legitimate, that NXT won the ratings war for the last night head-to-head, but it was also fucking TakeOver, so fuck off. Walter versus Ciampa, you can't, what are you going to do? So, of course. But other than that, AEW did win that war. So, if you want to call it a war, if you want to say that whatever side chose to pick, because AEW wasn't predatory when they chose Wednesday night either. They actually filed a trademark for Tuesday nights. But it was TNT that decided Wednesday would probably be a better night for it. So they went with what the network wanted because it's on their fucking network. So the Wednesday night wars were born. But regardless of how or why it played out, in WWE, there's also a misconception that NXT is leaving Wednesday night because they got their ass kicked by AEW. That's also not the case. NXT is leaving because USA is gonna put hockey on that night now. And I suppose you could say, well, they're choosing to put hockey on Wednesday night instead of NXT because it's going to do better than NXT. Sure. But that doesn't mean AEW chased them away necessarily. It could, but we don't know that for sure. That could be why USA decided to move them and put hockey in their place. But ultimately, it's not so much a war, I don't think, as it was just almost a battle of attrition. So now each company's got their Wednesday night and Tuesday night. They got their nights to themselves now. What they do with it from here, who knows? That'll be what really decides who's the better, because now you have access to all the wrestling fans, not half, because there's people that are torn. I would be watching NXT if I wasn't watching AEW. I would be watching AEW if I wasn't watching NXT, but I pick which one I like better, and then I watch that one, and then maybe I'll watch the other one later. Maybe I won't. So now that they have the whole night to themselves, they'll be able to have the potential to pull their maximum audience. How many people are going to watch your product if you are the only wrestling product available that night? Of course, I think Impact was Tuesday night, but aren't they moving to Thursday night? Nobody watches Impact anyway. What am I talking about? So each NXT Tuesday, AEW Wednesday, we'll start to see, I think this week, I guess, we'll know, probably by the time you get this podcast, we'll know what the ratings looked like that night. Now, you're not going to pull everybody from NXT. Everybody that was watching NXT, the 600,000 and change, 700,000, they're not going to AEW's not going to pick up that many viewers. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, and it was interesting to hear Chris's take on it. He sounds defiant. When he talks about it, he sounds like, yeah, we kicked their ass. Fuck them. And he has that attitude to his tone, whether he kind of used, whether he uses those exact words or not, it's there in sentiment. So And this podcast is just full of great gems. There was one where Bully was really good at pressing Jericho. He wanted a little bit deeper explanation on the Festival of Friendship and who was working backstage that told Jericho that he couldn't. So much good stuff on this podcast. There's so many different clips to choose from. I just kind of gave you a little bit of the highlights. I recommend going to check this out. Or if you have Sirius Satellite, go check out the full Busted Open radio show. But it is available in the podcast form with that interview. And it was a great interview. Highly recommend checking it out. Jericho also had Stone Cold Steve Austin on his podcast this week. No clips from that. Not a lot to cover. If you've heard Steve talk anytime ever, you've heard all of these stories before, multiple times probably. So there's nothing new to really take away from it. But if you just love hearing these guys talk, a lot of people, I saw a lot of comments that people just enjoyed watching Steve and Chris talk, just being a fly on the wall for their conversation. Here's basically a part 2 to that following Steve's career. So go ahead and check that out if you have interest. You can check out Busted Open every single day, 6 days a week on Sirius Satellite Radio. If you're into that, if you just got the podcast, you can find it. I believe they'll have clips and highlights built into the podcast from the show, all the big talking points, and you can find that also 6 days a week. Let me tell you something, brother. You can check out full episodes each and every Sunday right here on this channel, dude. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to take your vitamins and say your prayers, brother.